Welcome to the 56th video in this series, Foundations of Communist Organizing. Today we will be going through part 3, Internal Party Struggle of the Communist Party in the Tradition of the Left. I've subtitled this Centralized Party, Organic Growth, Shared Commitment, No Formal Rules. This section is best expressed as one on internal party struggle and how it is addressed, organized around and with, and engaged. Immediately, it specifies that the party center doesn't have any way to discipline the rank and file, aside from the ability to kick out anyone who doesn't follow orders, while all militants make a commitment not to a leader within the center, but to doctrine, program, and tactics. Because all party militants share the same common goal and methods to that commitment, they remain disciplined and in line with the center, which in turn continually works to elaborate and clarify the doctrine, program, and tactics, especially in terms of theoretical, programmatic, and tactical cornerstones, which the party depends upon for existence. Through carrying out this commitment on both ends, the party itself integrates them into its organizational structure in such a way that allows for real discipline without coercion, and the organizational structure and organs develop in Congress with this, and developments of the doctrine, program, and tactics in such a way that is able to support the dynamically shifting daily life of the party. The party structure itself arises at the same instant that tactics and so on arise. They are inseparable, as in order to carry out tactics, the structure must support those tactics, and the tactics must in turn shape the organizational structure to better support action as the structure's fundamental material characteristic necessary to carry out tasks. As a side note, this may be why the ICP is so virulently against actually speaking about the actual structure, as the organizational structure is something much closer to the material and character as opposed to general tactics, which are significantly more abstract until they are actually put into action. Thus, the highly material, clear organizational structure does not fit within the idealized historical party in their conception. Just food for thought there. Starting from the premise that, quote, revolution is not a question of forms of organization, end quote, in ignorance of the lessons of the Paris Commune and a recognition of the need of the class party to smash the state, which automatically made it a question of organization that is capable of doing such. Despite the historical change, they refused to abandon the initial conception, so while they recognized that the definite need for the political class party, and then developed that into the invariant program, principles, tactics, historical party, etc., they refuse to talk about actual organization. This is despite the fact that the tactics and any organization that can carry them out is fundamentally dependent on the organizational form that you use. Hence, if you can say things about the program, doctrine, and tactics, which are all in a dialectical relation, wherein they arise and shift together, so too does the organizational form have a dialectical relationship with all of these arising in the same instant. It is useless to speak of them without also speaking of the organization, as that is the material basis by which they are carried out. If you can say something about one of these, you can say something about all the rest. Now, for a significant aside, bringing in some cybernetics terminology is the science of effective organizing. So then what does the ICP do? Well, since they can't engage the organizational structure, they instead do something that is called black boxing the recursion, wherein they look only at the inputs and outputs and don't bother looking at the internals of it. This is something entirely normal for organizations, but because of this pathology, they do so immediately. Usually this black boxing will occur at much more local levels, but it doesn't here. It happens all levels of it. So in a black boxing, let's say that you are at the head of a factory, right? You don't particularly need to have any information about how production is carried out. All you need to know are the inputs, and then you need to know the outputs. And if the inputs are increasing but the outputs are not, or if the inputs are staying the same but outputs are decreasing, or anything along those lines, then that tells you there's something wrong happening in there. And usually these lower levels have autonomy to do whatever they want within it. But when there's a problem within it, then, the higher recursion might come in and say, hey, listen, we're noticing a reduction in productivity. We want to understand why. You need to talk to us. Or you might be producing more output, despite having the same or less input. And they might say, hey, we want to know what's going on inside there so that we can bring it to other people in order to our other factories and so on and so forth, in order to increase the productivity as a whole. But in general, within the black boxing, the autonomous sections maintain autonomous action unless there is some sort of emergency. Usually, these black boxing is only done on the lowest levels of organization rather than immediately. Because if you're doing them immediately, then you are not getting the information that you actually need in order to make any determinations for planning. Long form planning. So, continuing. Hence the need for everyone to be aware of everything going on in the party at all times, experience in all forms of party work, and absolute agreement with the center and program, doctrine, and tactics at all times, because the center needs to abdicate power to local managers at all times everywhere, while relying on quote-unquote fraternal solidarity, and expelling anyone who disagrees at any point from the party, to keep all the disparate groups attached to the center. It's the only way that such a structure could function, which is incapable of self-analysis because the organizational structure has been obscured. Anything outside the center and above that, the environment, is instantly black-boxed. To support this, the center also hands out an approved technology matrix, that is their short list of tactics, which they have determined to be appropriate given environmental conditions to produce the results they expect. This approved technology matrix is a description of work methods that are possible. For example, do you make steel with coal or something else? And usually that is handled locally because they are aware of what is on hand at any given time. But instead, in this case, it's handled by the center. The center probably doesn't have a strong conception of the real coefficients, the results and inputs going on here, and how they do or don't align with the expectations according to the program, doctrine, and so on. The results are probably that tons of completely impossible tactics are put in front of people who end up having to do the best that they can and then can't actually carry it out. They have fascinatingly decided on some of the most difficult ways to attenuate variety, that is, possible states of being, while getting the least possible out of it. They've done what Safford Beer in Designing Freedom gave an example of, wherein every individual customer is given an individual shop guide. This gets people exactly what they could need all the time, but is extraordinarily inefficient and thus demands the organizational structure itself in such a way that it can support it. For example, making it so it's a high-profile, expensive shop which does not get many customers, which is exactly what we see happen with the ICP-style party. What's worse is that they clearly understand the problems and seek to deal with it, trying to create a robust organizational form capable of dealing with the problems they create for themselves, having maximal dynamism through rejection of formalism, heedless of the fact that this will just create informal formalisms, claiming essentially that people will quote-unquote magically, and we'll get into this more later, especially in the conclusion, straight out articles of faith, enter the party when conditions are right, and that the party doesn't in fact need to educate them when that occurs, and positioning the center as having various powers to deal with issues. Putting aside putting aside the aside about cybernetics and proper scientific organization, the aim that the ICP puts forward is to produce an organizational activity wherein research and rational definition of these bases on which a party is organized on, including theoretical, programmatic, and tactical cornerstones, are maintained, and anything that does not maximize them are rejected on all levels, including any kind of internal structure. The organization is constructed and adapted to the activity it carries out in a given environment, within the limitations of shared principles. 1. Homogeneous tactical and programmatic foundation. 2. Obligation to work in trade unions or, more generally, economic organizations of direct proletarian action. 3. Tactical plan defined from the start based on historic lessons, the approved technology matrix. 4. Rejection of political united fronts. And 5. Uncompromising tactics in areas of double revolution. Double revolution in this case would be in terms of nations that are undergoing a national revolution against imperialists in conjunction with a class-based revolution. Continuing. The party itself seeks to be known externally through deed to be a unitary, singular, international organization that is distinct from all other organizations, with activity requiring organs, instruments of centralization. These are necessarily disciplinary and auditing structures to make sure that the various organs are in line with the center, however they might call these instruments. Coordination and policy. And policy is necessarily formalism, bureaucracy, or whatever insult they want to throw at themselves here. Continuing. The party's action derives the development of the structure, and the aim is to produce a robust organization by carrying out correct party work. Incorrect party work will harm organizational structure. We cannot take party centralization, discipline, and organizational structure as a priori, as the daily activity of the party does not necessarily increase organizational robustness if the activity is not correct. The organizational structure, being the basis for all tactics to be carried out, should emerge from prefigured tactics that are accepted by everyone. If the tactics are incorrect, then discipline, centralization, and organization will be malformed. While this is generally correct, one cannot truly prefigure tactics, as the tactics you carry out are dependent on external factors, internal factors, specific circumstances, and so on, regardless of any claims otherwise. In addition, they claim that organizational form cannot girder on-the-ground tactics and allow victory to be carried forward, which is absolutely incorrect, as tactics become available with greater organization, and greater organizational strength allows for greater action to be taken, regardless of the correctness of that action. For example, overwhelming an enemy with numbers. We don't necessarily want to do that, but it's better to have different tactics available and to be able to carry them out, which is allowed by greater and more organizational strength and form. They also claim that organizational structure cannot drown out divergences, disagreements, currents, and factions, and while this can be true to some degree, it is also false, as an organization that detects these more easily can deal with them via internal processes of any type. So your organizational structure should be such that it is capable of detecting the development of these divergences, disagreements, currents, and factions, and also designed in such a way that is able to, upon recognizing them, deal with them. How it deals with those things is its own matter. But the mere existence of an organizational structure that is partial to the development of these things, which there absolutely are organizational structures that can allow the development of divergences and stuff. This isn't a questionable thing, it's the reality. Means that there are also organizational structures that reduce those things, and therefore the party should be pursuing them automatically and in a prefigurative manner because it understands that we need to reduce these sorts of things. Next, it makes note that resolving factionalism or differences of opinion by coercive force will not work. Instead, calls for the party to have central organs with absolute power, which does not punish the disobedient, but instead removes the existence of disobedience via the integration of doctrine, program, and tactics in the organizational structure, in such a way that the organization produces obedient and homogeneous militants rather than any sort of organizational sanction. If there are issues of discipline, it either means that the center's orders are not in line with the traditional foundation, or that the organization hasn't got those traditional foundations fully in place. Taking it for granted the idea that there's ever a period wherein the organization can have orders that are in line with this foundation, or actually fully establish them at all, which is something that must be evident in order to support this conception. They do recognize that enforcement, administrative measures, and punishment can resolve the immediate issue though, but that does not fix the internal problem, which is indeed the case. Again, the organization they seek to build is on the cornerstones of theory, program, and tactics, which will produce through daily activity and development, centralization, and discipline. However, quote, after those cornerstones are solidified, the organizational construction becomes a purely technical matter. Emphasis mine. So, after all that time talking about how, oh no, everything's organic, everything's through, natural selection and stuff. Oh no, actually organizational structure becomes a purely technical matter. Okay, so we're off the organic train now. Thank you very much. Wonderful. But again, this is a silly conception that the organization must first establish itself through daily activity before starting to apply technical and purposeful predictive organizational management and development. But I think it is of key importance to recognize this shift as they recognize halfway through that the organization can be developed in a technical process. This development, according to the text, is because the party requires structures to coordinate, harmonize, and direct party activity. In service of this, the party will need an operational central organ, which plans and issues instructions, a hierarchy of people with responsibility to areas of party activity, a centralized and efficient communications network, and a multitude of operational instruments. However, it is important to note that having all of these while not having a solid base, which naturally produces them, will not guarantee centralization, activity, or discipline. Tactics should be related to the program, with general tactical norms being specified in such a way that it is unrigid and open for on-the-ground interpretation. As the struggle develops, the tactics and action become more clear as we quote-unquote lock in on the revolution. And by having more and more clear tactics, the mass movement of that the party attracts will accept orders more willingly. In carrying out tactics, individuals and groups maintain the factor of initiative, discovering the most effective ways to combat the conditions of the bourgeois system that are specific to them, while the party aims to explain general tactical norms to these individuals and groups so that they can harmonize with the larger movement. The party should only carry out action which is capable of carrying out, and should not overextend. The tactical plans of the party should never rest in the sway of hierarchies external to the party who come up with new ideas when it suits their fancy. Rather, tactical plans should be rigidly coordinated, theoretically coherent, in line with the political consciousness of the militants as they train their political consciousness, rest within party tradition such that everyone is familiar with them, and are prepared in advance and known to all within the organization, so that the center knows how the periphery feels about the tactic. If they are not as such, then the bond between the captain and the crew is broken and the ship will run aground. In turn, the party itself makes a guarantee that the doctrine is established at the beginning of the movement and unchangeable by the center or anyone, that the organization is internationally unique and only brings in individuals rather than engaging in any fusions, while rejecting anyone who is part of another organization, and that the tactics of the party are publicly known and unchanging upon conception in the international congresses, while the rank and file have the power only to initiate actions with acceptance of the center, which doesn't recognize changing conditions or special circumstances as a pretext to breaking with tactical decisions made, with the tactics being based in tradition, doctrine, program, and so on as the approved technology matrix. This is, of course, a terrible idea and results in the necessity of either supremely vague tactics, which is what ends up being the case, by the way. Revolutionary defeatism, for example, is a tactic. I would not particularly term that as a tactic. That is certainly that is a very open-ended thing in the sense that, yes, it has a definite definition, and obviously we should be doing that. But if I'm asking, okay, what kind of action should I be taking on the ground? What that results in is essentially saying, okay, my action should involve carrying out the principles of revolutionary defeatism. That is distinct from I'm carrying out the tactic of revolutionary defeatism on the ground. That doesn't tell me how to do the carrying out of that on a material, concrete basis. So yeah, these are vague tactics, which are not helpful for any militant on the ground, or a process of self-destruction, as tactics cannot be relied on by militants on the ground who recognize that the tactics diverge from their material conditions. Examples of this unchanging tactical norms include, for example, absenteeism and support for national liberation movements, including democratic ones. They are not a rigid scheme applied universally everywhere and at all times, but instead based solely on the strength of the enemy forces, changing in response to them. It's here that we see and must reiterate that the party's actions and tactics, external relations, are dialectically related to the internal organizational structure. Thus, tactics and aim, program, rules of operation, organizational structure and strategy. Strategy and program are actually the same in this case. Principles and action, doctrine, internal conditions, external environment, theory and practice, and so on, are all dialectically related and arise at the same time, dependent on one another. These, and particularly the program, must contain a clear outline of future society's structure as a negation of the present structure, prefiguring communist society, describing the process by which this new condition is reached. So, because these things are all arising together, that means that we can say things about all these things in relation to one another. We can say, okay, we need to be carrying out these tactics, we need to be carrying out this program or strategy, and therefore our organizational structure needs to be put together in this way. And the reason that we're doing that is because we have our clear outline of future society structure as a negation of the present society, and therefore this is our program, because that's our aim. Our program is attempting to bring the aim to reality. And the rules of operation are the limitations on the tactics that we can carry out at a given time, and so on and so forth. All these things are interconnected. You can't talk about one without talking about the other, and you cannot concretize one without concretizing another. It's not useful to go in and say, oh, well, actually, we can't talk about the organizational structure until such and such point has already been reached. No. If we have already established the existence of something, then we can put that out there, right? We can say, okay, we are capable of using our minds in order to anticipate what kind of organizational structures are necessary to carry out the strategy that we have developed and the tactics that are demanded by the strategy based on the material conditions that we exist in at this given time and place, right? This doesn't seem particularly confusing to me, but with organic centralism, with the Communist Party and the theory of the left, it very clearly rejects such things on grounds it's formalism and stuff. We'll get into this more when I go over my own reading of organic centralism, where I put everything together and tried to suss out what the heck is going on with this. Okay, continuing. The party itself must avoid bureaucracy, and no structure should be assumed to be immune to corruption. Criticism and the ability to carry it out along with alarmism are necessary, as the price of failure to criticize is so high, but should never become any sort of quote-unquote sport. They are necessary in order to bring to attention the development of a faction. Individuals do not form factions out of amusement or as bad actors, as is difficult and thankless and potentially dangerous. Any bad actor will apply careerist activity carrying the banner of unity through suppression of factions, not factionalism itself. Factions and dissent are symptoms of improper general functioning of the party, not individuals. And we must always remember that opportunism tends to come into the party by demanding unity under disciplinary force out of fear of disunity, rather than seeking to cure the disease within the party. It seeks immediate resolution of issues through negative repression, rather than positive resolution of differences through discipline and harmonization. In truth, factions are prevented through correct revolutionary politics, with the slogan, quote, against the causes that allow factionism to appear, end quote, as distinct to against factionism. Over time, with this, disciplinary measures should be necessary less and less until they disappear. The perfectly disciplined and centralized party is one which requires no disciplining by the center to carry out correct action. The party, despite expecting and not punishing factions, does not admit, encourage, or tolerate them. It treats both the disease that is factionism and its symptoms of it, using historical experience as a doctor uses science. It focuses on prevention, study, defense, and realization of proper environment and homeostasis, which will result in a well-functioning organism. The cardinal points are solutions to problems shared by the whole party, and all militants need to be in agreement with the cardinal points. They don't actually specify what the cardinal points are, but I suspect what they mean there is essentially the theoretical foundation, which is materials, dialects, and stuff, the programmatic core, tactical unity, the organizational principles and rules of operation. Basically, the fundamental bases that we talked about up above, the doctrine, program, and tactics, right? Okay, continuing. While there can be different positions, they must be within the limitations of these points. Solutions to problems should not be an effort of political will between disagreeing parties, but a scientific, note inherently political process, by the way, analysis of the cardinal points of the program, doctrine, and tactics, with the line accepted being that which is most closely aligned. This science is a collective work carried out on a unified foundation that everyone accepts. Hence, the whole party becomes a body of scientific research. And according to this text, even if there is only a single person who had a line that most closely adhered to the cardinal points, then that is what the party should orient towards, not to some majority on a democratic principle. Rather, polemics need to be checking and verifying statements made as conditions change, and measuring the adherence to a cardinal line, along with the actual work of the party, which does not focus on maintaining popularity or immediate successes, but instead on maintaining conditions internally, which will allow to, when conditions externally are right, influence history. Heedless that maintaining a popular face and achieving success are key to being known as an organization to place interest in for when these external conditions emerge, or to be able to create shifts in the interim that produce historical conditions in the same way that a general organizes their troops so that the enemy will find themselves on poor terrain which the general can take advantage of. Okay. The party should not focus on the failures of individuals, as any mistakes that they make in a position were fundamentally on account of the organizational structure and life of the party, allowing mistakes to be made. Removing one individual from a position without making changes to the position itself will simply result in the same problem emerging. Therefore, the party's life activity needs to be such that it is in tune with the center and with real conditions. And no matter any individual's stance, it needs to be able to only carry out the correct action. It should not matter your personal views in a position. You should only be able to carry out what is necessary according to the party through a highly robust and technical party organization. This emergent discipline is fundamentally the channeling and utilization of membership in flux, with the organizational structure harmonizing the membership. Through the organizational structure harmonizing all membership and sharing their experiences, the party learns in an active manner, and any disciplinary sanctions only create separation and the end of harmonization, and thus can only be used sporadically for individual aberrant manifestations. And that is my summary of Part 3, Internal Party Structure from the Communist Party and Tradition of the Left. Tomorrow we will be going over Part 4 of this, Party Development and Organic Centralism. As usual, if you'd like to go over the quotations I derived this summary from, you will find a link in the description below to this Google Doc, which includes all my notes. You will also find a link to the United Marxist Pact Discord server if you want to talk to me about anything regarding this or anything else in the other series or communism in general. We would love to have you. And that is the end of today's topical summary. I hope to see you tomorrow.